Tēnā tātou tēnei au e tuku miha tona ki a koutou kua hara mai ki te whakarongo ki tēnei waku rangahau. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for making the time to listen to my presentation today. I mui taku timata ka tuku o I te karakia hei whakamana I tēnei haora. So just before I begin, I'm going to open us with karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hia ki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, ti hei mauri ora. Kia ora whānau, and thank you for allowing me the moment to open our hui today in karakia, and I'm going to hand back over to April.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aikman, for that. So it's my pleasure, honestly, truly, it's great to have you here today. And it's also great to welcome all of our guests. Today we're hearing from Dr. Pounamu Jade Aikman about his work, He Kitenga no te whare, Insights from the Whare. Dr. Pounamu Jade Aikman is an independent scholar working at the intersection between criminal justice, education and health, and he is director of the research consultancy known as Mana Pounamu Consulting. He's just completed a 2-year project with New Zealand Police, Understanding Policing Delivery. He's also a Victoria University of Wellington's 2025 Emerging Māori Writer in Residence. And as well as that, a very busy man, alongside Dr. Lisa Thompson, Dr. Pounamu Jade Aikman has recently been awarded a Marsden Grant exploring rangatahi tāne Māori involvement in crime and harm. So again, it's a privilege to have you here, and I'll hand over to you now for your presentation.
Kia ora. Thank you, April. So, kia ora anō, everyone, and it's exciting to be able to share some of the findings about our research with police over the last 2 years. As April mentioned, this was under the umbrella of the Understanding Policing Delivery Research Project, which goes back quite a far way to an earlier iteration when Waikato was also involved in an earlier stage of the project. A bit later on, I came in as one of the 3 research teams dedicated to unpacking the world of policing as it's understood through our communities through the lens of fair and equitable outcomes in future. We had more of a focus on what we call the whare, so the te whare kahurangi, or the Blue House, and what we mean by that is a particular focus on the world of policing as it's understood at right from the recruit level, the entry point into the whare, and beyond. And so what my kōrero today is going to explore is largely our experiences there. There was an initial focus that we had to couple our findings within the whare within communities as well, to explore community voice and community perspectives, which I'll get into a little bit. But because of things that were frankly outside of our control, we ended up primarily focusing on the whare itself, so within what we call the Blue Whare. That is the reason why the report is called He Kitenga no te whare, Kitenga being insights or observations. And we use that metaphor because we heard those that we worked with from the recruit level all the way up to superintendent use terms like that to describe, like the blue whare, the blue whānau, and we used it as a metaphor that acknowledges that we were listening, but in as much as well as a way for our findings to make sense within the current design of the whare of policing, particularly the relationships between different teams, different people, different functions doing different things. And so the recommendations that we produced were in line with, broadly speaking, that metaphor of the whare. And what we found is that helped ground the purpose of what we were doing when I was explaining it to right at the recruit level up to superintendent level, and also helped frame it in a way, or frame our research in a way that would connect with the current operational realities of policing. The other thing I want to emphasize is that I was really fortunate to work alongside two other key research teams, Ihi Research down in Ōtautahi Christchurch and the Donald Beasley Institute in Ōteposi Dunedin. Each of those teams focused on complementary areas of research. And so it's important to view my research here, He Kitenga no Te Whare, in tandem with theirs as well. The whole idea of the research project, as it was pitched to me now a long time ago, was trying to get different teams focusing broadly on equity and equitable outcomes in policing and what that can look like. And we each had a particular view of the whare. Our focus was particularly inside the whare, and then you had Donald Beasley Institute, Bridget there, and then Kath down at Ihi Research, exploring other aspects outside the whare and within as well. So my research should be looked at as a component within a broader landscape of research done to explore what this means in relation to not just inside the whare, but outside as well. So overall, we focused on key po within that whare, within the blue whare. As I said, the metaphor of blue whānau, the blue family, the blue whare was one that organically arose. So we didn't come up with it on our own. What that also reflects, though, was a willingness to listen and to try and demonstrate that the tikanga that I've developed over time in terms of how to engage with communities, because a lot of my research previously has been based in communities, and I did a research focused degree, a PhD at the Australian National University, exploring Tūhoe police relationships over the past 185 years. What that showed me was, a certain way of engaging with our whānau in Tūhoe. I'm not Tūhoe myself, but the emphasis on, recognizing that we have shared experiences was really important. And that ethic was particularly salient in our police research, because coming in as researchers, we had challenges around understanding what it was that we were doing based on lived experience of police organisations in different jurisdictions across the world that have had research done to them, not with them. So that phrase comes very strongly from within kaupapa Māori research. Now, I'm not saying that I'm comparing like with like. What I am saying is that the tikanga, founded in humility and being humble, applied really well in how we did our research with police. What all that also means is that our initial phase of the project was dedicated just to whakawhanaungatanga, and more than merely getting to know people. What that showed is a level of vulnerability within ourselves, with my research team, also to show that, and why we were there, and as I'm about to go into, we were working with staff across the organisation to hear, to listen, and to understand their realities. The difficulty has been overseas, and we found this early on, is that when the research with police organisations has tended to have a polarising effect on that particular police organisation, and we didn't want to have that happen, because we can agree that there have been myriad challenges in how not just policing, but the state has interacted with not just Māori communities, Pasifika communities, and other immigrant whānau in a really demonstrated way over a long period of time. We recognise that, and so did the police staff that we worked with as well. What we were trying to say, though, is that coming at this from a perspective of not trying to blame, but rather trying to figure out what could be in the apopo, in the tomorrow of policing, was really fundamental. It also gave, I think, a lot of put people at ease when we explained what we were doing, and that their voices mattered. There were some instances where we saw, people wanting to engage in that cordial really directly, and in others not so much. And again, you have, I think what was really important is for us to come to terms with the operational realities of being an early constable, as you going to your 5th 5F or your 5th family violence call out in a day is going to be draining. And while that doesn't happen everywhere, it is a reality that I was really keen to understand, which is why, if whanaungatanga, getting to understand and know someone based on the ethic of whānau, is a process that is ongoing, but we dedicated much of our initial part of the project to so doing. And so on that's why we described our research in terms of exploring the Blue Whare. And for us, this involved 4 key po. So I'm going to get into those. So we were at the Royal New Zealand Police College as one of our initial entry points into the research, and while also in 3 other districts in the North and the South Island. I can't mention what those are, but they were spread out. We gave a lot of thought into what that might look like to give a balanced perspective of inside urban, rural demographics and things like that. I can say that we were at the police college. So when I was initially coming to terms with what we might understand our project to look like, I came up with and after hearing in our very initial conversations with police around, being the Blue Whānau and in the Blue Whare, and after a little bit of the initial research, I came up with 4 key po that I saw as not the only po, but key pillars within the house of policing that time and again came up as key aspects, and not just key aspects of change, but also levers of opinion and levers of potential change as well in future. So we focused on imagining the journey of a civilian who wants to join the police, and in their entry point, the front door of the police as an organisation is the Royal New Zealand Police College in Porirua. So that was our starting point, and that forms one of the initial po of our research, the initial pillar there. And so the college itself isn't the po, initial training is the po. So initial training at the time we did our research was the designation or the name of the program given to the initial phase of that transition from civilians, into Blue Whānau. And what that helped us appreciate was what it takes to become part of the Blue Whānau and the tikanga that you learn. So they're learning tikanga, learning protocols in lots of different situations. The college was a place to impart that, like any other academy. And so we focused our attention there initially. The plan, although this didn't fully eventuate, but the plan was to then follow some of those recruits who then would become constables as the first rank, following them out into the districts that they went to. In some instances, we were able to do that, but it got a little complicated logistically to actually manage that, and also sometimes we weren't able to fully follow up because of other duties that the recruits we followed head on. So we, at the college, being the starting point, we then moved out into districts themselves, into the 3 of the 12 police districts. We also travelled to a few other districts as well, but we didn't really include them as our research focuses because it was concentrated in 3 particular districts over the North and the South Island. So if initial training in the police college is the entry point to the Blue Whare, and initial training being that key pillar, the second pillar, the second po, was leadership and development, and we were interested in what does leadership look like. Very quickly, what I saw is that there is a pendulum that swings between the desire to support and provide pastoral care to early recruits, and that really the pendulum does shift to a more command and control focus there, and that is the key thing that I was interested in, is noting how does that change as the journey of a constable as they progress in their career, because the pendulum does swing between different kinds of leadership style. So I'm not purely just interested in the hierarchy of rank, but what does good leadership look like? And I'm getting ahead of myself because it was a project I was really excited about, but I'll get there in a second. The third pillar is cultural responsiveness, and particularly how the organisation makes sense of how to work with and alongside particular communities in our beautiful Aotearoa, with a specific focus on Māori and Pasifika communities. And that was a key aspect, a key point of difference for our research therein. So that meant following, exploring the experiences of Māori and Pasifika staff. Just in a note on nomenclature, there is a difference between staff as a whole, and then employees. So you might have, the civil aspect, the civil bureaucracy of police, and employs multiple people to be able to, perform functionary duties within like any public sector organisation, and then you have constabulary or sworn staff. The terms did change a lot, and they have changed in the whakapapa of policing in Aotearoa over a long time. But you've got basically a uniform blue whānau, and then our whānau in like Police National Headquarters in Wellington, but also the whānau working at the front desk or in other aspects and stations and other roles as well across the motu. And so that's what I see as leadership existing in lots of different spaces, because leadership isn't just hierarchical, it organically evolves in different spaces, and we were interested in where that is happening across the organisation. So that kind of folds into cultural responsiveness, particularly in terms of what does Māori and Pasifika leadership look like, or what has it looked like. And then the last pillar that we were really interested in was strategy and culture. So, and in terms of this, what I particularly mean is the culture of the organisation as it is, not in terms of cultural responsiveness, but I was really interested in what are the tikanga of police as an organisation, and how do we reconcile histories of challenge and difficulty with what the aupō of policing might look like. And so this is where strategy, in terms of our strategic directions for policing, what do they look like? How do they translate into culture? And then also how does that big thing that we think about in terms of, if strategy is the, navigating towards a particular paitawhiti, a particular horizon line, how is that vision translated right down to the level of the constable-sergeant relationship? So that was a big focus of our research as well. And as I mentioned, we engaged with constabulary staff, both at the recruit level all the way up to superintendents, which is the huge range of ranks and experience as well, because with those ranks came a lot of insight and experience. And so the recommendations that we co-developed with lots of different staff in police, from straddling both employee and sworn officer experience, because we had these ideas of what might work in future in terms of envisioning an equitable aupō of policing in Aotearoa, but the pragmatics of that were a fundamental aspect of our focus, because we might have this idea, but if it is not able to be organically aligned with, say, work streams and the tikanga of the Blue Whare, it may not find expression or fruition. So working really closely with different, employees and sworn staff as well was really fundamental. Constabulary staff, sworn staff, fundamental, and helped us appreciate as well that even wonderful ideas without a pragmatic aspect may struggle to find that fruition and to find expression. So broadly speaking, these are our overarching findings. There's a lot more detail in the report I wrote. The version that I have is uploaded on my website and free to access. But these are some of the high level findings that I'd like to emphasize. And this first one here, the ethic of service, is a core driver behind a lot of the why constabulary staff join the police. There's a strong ethic of wanting to look after, to protect, act in a kaitiaki role to community, and that was pretty palpable in all the discussions we had. But I think also what we found is that ethic of service extends also to, especially into the employee area of what I came to know as employee-led networks. And so these are networks focused specifically around a common cause. So it might be the rainbow ELN. And ELN as a term, employee-led network, is a recognised term within the public service in Aotearoa. So I think Woman in Blue is one of them, and there are a few others. And just, where you have a particular kaupapa that you are a part of, that becomes that anchor for relationships with other people in the organisation. And we worked really closely with some of the ELNs and saw how coming together on a particular kaupapa saw you reach across rank, across experience, and all of that. And that fundamentally helped, because we could see how the organisation responds to certain kaupapa within that are in common conversation at any particular given time. So whatever kaupapa of the day might be happening, there may be an ELN that is either championing that cause within the organisation, or at least having a conversation to that effect. One of the second point there, strategic focus is not talk pragmatically. So I mentioned before, like any organisation in the public service, we have policy that is given by government and cabinet, and that flows down into operational levels in terms of what the strategic focuses for organisations should be. As a side note, a lot of what we explored and came to understand was how police, as a function of the executive within our constitution, also have operational independence in what they do, but they exist as a public service organisation like any other in the public service. Now, there's definitely differences in terms of the ability to use force, that is bestowed upon constables through attestation when they graduate from the college. Yes, that is a key difference, and that they have the ability to deprive rights in particular situations. But the core realities of an organisation and of a bureaucracy were right there, heart and central for the experience that we had within talking with police, because a lot of the things we were finding is that we might have a good idea, but is that going to be properly implemented by this team over here? And so navigating bureaucracy is as much a humorous point that we discuss in our national conversation, in as much as it's quite a firm reality within the organisation, within the whare itself. My point there, though, is that we have these strategic focuses. Again, as I mentioned, what is our apopo of policing going to look like? And this is where police have an A3 on every wall and every station in the country called Our Business, and Our Business details what those strategic focuses are. But what we found is there, particularly the strategic focuses as they relate to cultural responsiveness and equity and working with Māori and Pasifika communities are not taught pragmatically. So this is a point that I'll raise in a second as well. But if you've got a strategic direction around, wanting to work or safer communities together, or turning the tide to Hurringa o Te Tai in relationship to the cultural responsiveness for Māori, that language needs to be translated into pragmatic reality particularly for constables. The majority of the organisation, of the sworn organisation, is concentrated at that constable level. And so translating what Ole Tai o False or Pasifika responsiveness, Te Hurringa o Te Tai Māori responsiveness, those need to be translated into actionable points and in ways that organically align with how the first manager-employee relationship works in police. And that is what I come to the next point, is that key relationship between sergeants and constables. Sergeants in the ranking structure are typically your first manager of a constable, who are a sergeant managing, a group of say 5 constables, or what have you. That is a key place to be able to impart knowledge of, we've got these bigger strategic goals, but what do they look like in practice? And what does it look like when I've got a team that's exhausted, say from another 5F or a 1M, a mental health call out, who are exhausted from that? How do we translate that down? Because what we found is people become a little bit overwhelmed when the language we use around equity, around cultural responsiveness, which of course are terms that we use right now. They may not be terms that we use in future, but what all that means in practice is more important, because and this is a statement I made, is that I don't think you need to have a PhD to understand what an equitable approach to working with communities might look like. But even that languaging can become alienating, and we saw people switch off very quickly, not because they weren't disinterested, but rather because they didn't know what it meant for them and their responsibilities and day-to-day responsibilities. So nurturing the sergeant-constable relationship based on what I saw as the tuakana-taina dynamic was critical, because not only, that's a key relationship within the organisation that is systematic across, different districts, because you're always going to have, in some for most of the time, you're going to have that relationship between sergeants and constables in terms of that manager relationship. Now, building effective teams through, that sergeant-constable relationship was time and again emphasised as the key way. Look after the sergeants, look after the constables, and things will get easier for us from from being able to manage. Because I think we saw a tendency to want to respond reactively to ever waiting for the next radio call rather than strategically directed activity, which I get to in a moment. So by strategically directed activity, I mean in terms of what could Te Huringa o Te Tai, what could the Māori responsiveness strategy have looked like in a shift that a constable and a PST and a public safety team, what might that look like for them? Now, the job of people who know how to speak that language and can simultaneously speak the language of operational realities for our whānau on the front lines becomes critical, because it's that role, that function that doesn't really exist in terms of translating that down to pragmatic reality and to actionable constabulary practice is the term I used, because time and again when I spoke with recruits up to superintendent, they were wanting to know what that meant. Not necessarily superintendents had a better grasp of it, but even at the sergeant level there was hesitation because you had people who didn't want to do wrong, and who also understood the realities that why we have strategic focuses and all of this, and in terms of responsiveness to Māori and Pasifika communities. There's more that I can go on that for ages, but I just noted that was a really powerful relationship and therefore a lever of potential change. Because if we translated all of that high-level language of even equity, because that term unfortunately can make people switch off, and that's a reality. But if we can translate that down to what that might look like. So it might look like, for example, constables engaging more regularly with church leaders, with marae, with koe and kaumātua on marae, but it could also look like other things, So the tendency just to say that it's just about te reo, learning te reo and learning the history of colonisation in New Zealand is not the exclusive way to understand this, nor is it that needs to be seen as a package, as a suite of professional development opportunities to do so. But the biggest powerful difference that we saw for that was when personal stories were relayed, typically by Māori staff, around their experiences of what all of this has looked like to them in their work, and translating that down. But when I talk to senior Māori leaders in the organisation, and they relate to me time and again stories of, what to them Ole Tai Awhau, Pacific responsiveness, and Te Huringa o Te Tai, Māori responsiveness has looked like to them. And the college is a key place to be able to, for example, record some of those kōrero from those rangatira within police and then play it at college, because you've got them in that particular period of time. And now doing that helps build up a vocabulary with which new recruits, when they transition into constables, are able to have in their kete time and again at college. Because I went to the majority of weeks over a period of the 16-week recruit journey from the entry to the exit at the whare, and had myriad kōrero with lots of recruits who I still keep in touch with today, as now they're constables or into this, even into the sergeant level now, and they want to do something about it, but they were like, there's all this history is important, yep, but what does it mean for me? And that's the key disconnect that we identified that needs to be really supported, because you've got within the organisation expertise to be able to speak to that, which I think is quite exciting though, because it shows that this is a possibility that can unfold further in future. I want to I'm going to just jump over some of these, but please ask questions if you do want to know more. But the varied uptake of supported resolutions refers specifically to what has been described as the alternative resolution process. So, for example, not just diversion, but it could be things around driver licensing. That's where a strong amount of examples come from in terms of where the pathway into the criminal justice system is entered through traffic infractions and driver licensing issues. So the supported resolutions function helps to move across that. And that's been a long established kaupapa within police that has over and again shown its real value. But there's varied uptake of supported or alternative resolutions as the language that is in common parlance. But there's varied uptake of it from a mix of factors, from hesitation around not wanting to do the wrong thing, a lack of familiarity with the process in some instances, but also a belief in that is held by Samana Lufano that traditional prosecutorial mechanisms and methods are more effective than supported resolutions as an alternative. On that note, so MPERS is my second to last point there. MPERS refers to Māori, Pasifika and ethnic liaison staff. That term has changed to inevitably public service organisations change their names change the names of teams. MPERS is what a lot of people still use in the organisation to describe that combination of Māori, Pasifika and other ethnic liaison staff. Their role is really critical in providing the whanaungatanga relational way of working between, police at the station and in the district and the area, with particular community leaders, and are consistently seen as a critical function in how to do things. And one example that I shared in the report is that through the care and diligence with which a particular MPERS officer in one of the districts we focused on, the care with which they had worked with community meant that when an instance came up, and it was a gang arrest actually, when an instance came up of needing to arrest one of those members because of a firearms incident, instead of deploying the armed defenders squad and doing all of that as they could have done, and they did have the mandate to do, the relationship between this particular MPERS liaison staff and staff member, and in this case the president of the gang chapter, precipitated the voluntary surrender of that particular individual. And within that, when I spoke to some of the Blue whānau that have been involved both in the armed defender squad and then the the STG, which is the special tactics group, who's kind of like the SAS level of the organisation. Those ones in the special tactics group emphasise that leaves a much better that results in a much better outcome than deploying the Eagle helicopter, the various vehicles from the AOS and so on and so forth. And so what it's saying in that point is that whanaungatanga, working with communities, does work effectively, and there's both mana and good results by way of that. And it was emphasising, though, that this is not just some fluffy thing where you're just talking with someone and having a cup of tea. That misreads the fundamental aspect of whanaungatanga, which is to build trust. Now, this example of a voluntary surrender of an individual, of a wanted member of our community, shows that as well. It shows that really powerful relationship. And in the same breath, we heard examples of where that hasn't worked, where a lack of a relationship has led to massive breakdowns and the needing to send in the AOS, the Armed Defenders Squad. And of course, with that comes an enormous footprint that is left in the community, because not only are you physically there and the area is cordoned off, but the fear that is left within the community can be very palpable. And you have time and again whānau within the Blue Whare wanting to know how that can be done better. And also it puts people constantly on edge, like staff constantly on edge, if they're having to go out to those kinds of events. And so what we were trying to say, we don't say it in so many words, but that there is real value in spending time, that kaputitanga that we sometimes talk about, building those relationships with key community members, that can be leveraged as a little bit of a not so nice term, but that can be that can support positive outcomes in communities in future. And we heard myriad examples of that, which I talk about in the report. So that point I'm just talking about is whanaungatanga with communities works and is effective in policing for trust and confidence with that particular horizon line in mind. So this next slide, this is my last slide for my corridor, and kind of it talks about some of the recommendations that we developed. And a lot of these have come through, me coming up with an idea of, this might work. And I looked back in my notebook from when I was at spending time at the police college, and I'd put a note in the margin being like, could this idea work? And then I'd go and test that idea with some of the participants and who had experience either as area commanders or as constables and so on and so forth, and I would test the ideas with them. So at the Royal New Zealand Police College, we emphasised the need to teach police and New Zealand histories through a practical, what we call operational lens. What that means is, so colonisation happened. What is the so what of that in policing today? That is often the key disconnect that is not there in, training and professional development courses that talk about that. The experience of people feeling guilty did come up, and that is not productive, because I'd rather our blue whānau have a clear understanding of, that happened, what does this mean for me, and me being able to better manaki the communities that I'm going to be working with. And so there is a little bit of that, but it's not fully realised, I think, is the most graceful way I might say that. But the wonderful thing is, the way the organisation is structured means that is a real possibility. And I think from memory they are trying to do they've taken some of these recommendations on board to see how it might work. And part of that also meant extending the time of the time recruits are trained for, which was at 16 weeks and is now up at 20. And it used to be longer than that as well when cadets first became a feature of New Zealand Police in the 1950s. The importance here also is at the college is developing a framework for effective teaching. So this is tying into ideas of pedagogy. But what does good teaching look like when you are teaching a curriculum that is based on it has a strong focus on the doing things, learning laws, knowing what you can do, and then responding. And it was particularly learning how to effectively and with judgment, compassion, and dignity exert force. So what does that look like? And one thing that we notice is that is not always clear. So there are key ways to be able to explain in simple terms what things mean in certain contexts. And this does come down to teaching histories through a practical lens. Bringing it down constantly to a practical so what helped fundamentally in the places that it worked, particularly in really high stress situations like with firearms, for example. And that's where I saw that in use. And so I tested these ideas both with staff at the college and then participants outside of the college in different districts as well. The importance there also of teaching empathy through an operational lens. So what does empathy actually look like? So walking in someone's shoes, yes, but what does that actually mean? And breaking that down, not just saying the word, is really important, in particular around self-reflection. So we heard time and again the importance of self-reflection, and also the really effective tutors at college were ones that acknowledged that they'd made mistakes in the past, acknowledged that, this was not I could have done this differently. That space of vulnerability, recruits responded really, really well to, because it meant that, we can all make mistakes. And we identified quite a prominent fear of failure at the college, where, like in a lot of academies, not just paramilitary, but the fear of getting it wrong and wanting to get it right. But time and again, we heard college is the place where you should fall forward safely. That refers to a particular martial arts technique that they teach. But what was important there is that knowing that this is the place you want to make all your mistakes. And I remember one instructor said, make a million mistakes here, but none theoretically in district, because you want to learn that. And there's the proverb of learning from your mistakes is very powerful, but if you have a culture where there is a fear of failure, that's going to inhibit that as a reality, which is why self-reflection and training was particularly important. In terms of in districts, we saw the importance of field training units, which, the carry on, not just professional development, but the learning aspect of your apprenticeship, I suppose. So you do your first 16 or 20 weeks at college, extends out during a probationary period of up to, say, 2 years, in which you're involved in some parts of that in field training units. We heard how powerful field training units can be to, they come out of college and being caught or being supported in a net throughout. That really relational way of working we saw worked really well. Not everywhere, but the value of it in terms of the functional value was really important. Part of that as well was also the need, and this was emphasised to us by a number of different staff, different levels, was to recognise the importance of Māori and Pasifika staff experience within investigations. That's within CIB, so the Criminal Investigations Branch, because and this came from experienced staff that had worked in CIB for a long time, because they wanted to know how better they can do in Manaaki community. Again, they may not have said it in so many words, but they saw the value in a diversity of ethnicity and experience, is how they described it to us. I mentioned before about the importance of employee-led networks, typo there, but employee-led networks. And one of our key recommendations was resourcing them. And what that might look like can be, things like acknowledging in someone's, they don't use the term KPIs, but that is a thing in police, like any public sector organisation, recognising in there how to acknowledge someone's involvement, so they're not having to do it outside of their shift or their time at work, and acknowledging that, because it's a key space where you've got people that are organically coalescing around a particular kaupapa, and that's really powerful. And when we spoke with the ELNs, they were like, we want to support the organisation to enhance its practices, especially with regards to Māori and Pasifika responsiveness. And so we emphasise, that needs to be done really, really importantly. The last kind of series of examples of findings was around strategy, and I've talked a little bit about this already. The importance of translating strategy to practice, translating those terms that we use in strategic direction in documents, such as Our Business, that's what it's currently called, it's been refreshed now as of last year, to role and rank. That's a term that I use to describe the role that I have and the rank that I have. What does it mean? So, getting it right down to that level of saying, if you're a constable, and there's different stages, right? Because it comes, so what I said is tied actually to the pay scale. So the pay scale in police, Banji step 0, I think, is a recruit. And then it keeps going up and up and up, like in any public sector organisation. And so that's a common language that staff know, because it's the putia, you're getting paid every fortnight or every month. So I emphasise teach it to role and rank based on that. I just use that as an example, but it needs to be tied to that role and rank and the expectations that come from it. So when we're talking about Māori responsiveness, Māori and Pasifika responsiveness will look fundamentally different to a superintendent who's in charge of a district, down to a recruit, or more likely to a constable when they're first hitting the ground. Now, those differences and examples mean that sometimes the examples we give are more for the superintendent level, but that's not what a constable's going in as when they're first starting. And again, the last point that I wanted to emphasise is the importance of whanaungatanga again, and that working with and alongside communities does actually work and helps to build trust in ways that can also in the long term make policing easier to do, not just for the organisation but for the actual blue whānau that are on the ground, and wanting to make a difference for their communities. And time and again we saw that. There's lots of other stuff that was really exciting about the project. There was lots of learning to be had particularly on our side in terms of what the te ao o te pirihimana, the world of policing, looks like. And we framed all of this in a way to try and, support a conversation where there were more actionable, pragmatic so what's in our report. So we've identified this, we've identified some of the challenges that exist, but so what does this mean now for our practice? And I worked extensively with uniformed whānau and blue whare as well as employees to understand how that might land. So if I suggest an idea like I did in the margin of my notebook at the college, how would that translate out into practice? And that's where I came up across the Banji Step 0 phrase, because that helped, for example, know what that might look like in practice. I've got so much more to say. But I just wanted to emphasize how much of an enjoyable project it was. It was certainly a challenge. I'm not going to say that it wasn't, but through challenge comes understanding, and that has helped fundamentally in how we framed our research, and hope also that the report does actually find expression within the way policing is done, and also to open that conversation. And I'll just end on what I mentioned earlier when I started our kōrero today around, other jurisdictions in the world where research has been done with police organisations has had a really polarising effect. Since day one of my pitch for this project back in 2021, I did not want to have that as a reality, but I wanted to say, how can we make a difference? How can we listen but not have not have stereotypes of how research is done, influence how people are experiencing and understanding what it is that we're here to do. And that, humility and whanaungatanga were key aspects of that, but created a situation where I could, in the end, what took ages just to get the door open, I was able to, towards the end of the research, just pick up the phone, get in touch with friends who had now gone from recruit to constable and ask them of their experiences. Their experiences still help shape the report. As I said, lots more to say. Really enjoyable project, despite its challenges, which I appreciate because they were big learning curves, and ways that we might be able to figure out what does this mean in the apopo of policing in Aotearoa. Kia ora. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time. I really, despite everything, I loved the project. It was a privilege and humbling to be able to do so. And it opened, a world that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to see. So, I runga I tēnei e tuku miha tōna kia koutou kua hara mai tēnei ahi, just thanking you all for coming this afternoon and listening to my kōrero. And I'll close us off with karakia from one of my Ngāti Mani Poto karakia over at Kakepuku near Taumutu. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapapaunamu te moana, kia tere te kārohirohi I mua I tō huarahi, rātou kia rātou, oti rā tātou kia tātou, haumi e hui e, tā iki e.
Thank you so much.
Alright, ka kite.
See you later.
Ka kite.